Human carried an alien girl's water jar at dusk, only then learning why she walked alone. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's return to our main character. The desert dusk on Naru settled like a thin veil of copper over everything, soft enough to blur the edges, sharp enough to sting the lungs with dust. Evan Miller wiped a smear of engine grease from his cheek with the back of his glove, though it only spread the stain. His field pump groaned behind him, sputtering the way old machines do at the end of a long day, each metal click echoing through the empty outpost. He reached for his pack when he noticed movement along the ridge, a small shape struggling against the wind. It was the kind of shape you don't see unless you're tired enough, quiet enough, or lonely enough. Evan squinted. A girl. Alien. Thin. Carrying a water jar almost half her height, its ceramic surface catching the last rays of the sun. The jar swayed with each step like it wanted to pull her to the ground. She walked alone. Too alone for this hour. He felt that familiar tug in his chest, the one that had gotten him into trouble and miracles in equal measure. He stepped closer, boots crunching lightly against red sand. The girl stiffened at the sound, her shoulders lifting like a startled fawn. Up close, her skin glowed a faint lavender silver, shifting gently with the fading light. Her hands clutched the jar's handles with a grip that didn't match her slight frame. "Hey," Evan said softly, lifting both palms. "I'm not here to bother you. That jar looks heavy. Can I help you carry it?" Her eyes, pale, metallic, almost reflective, flicked to him, then to the jar, then back. No words, just a subtle shake of her head and a tighter hold. Wind pushed dust between them, brushing her thin shawl against her arms. She wavered under the weight. Evan hesitated only a second before stepping forward and gently taking one handle. She didn't pull away this time, just froze, breath catching like she wasn't used to being this close to anyone. When he lifted, the jar shocked him with its weight. Nearly 60 pounds, maybe more. Too much for a girl her size. "You've been carrying this alone?" he asked, voice low. Again, no answer. But her silence said everything. They started walking, Evan adjusting his pace to match her small steps. The jar hummed faintly from temperature shifts, the ceramic clicking in a steady rhythm, like a heartbeat against the quiet desert. Above them, the sky dimmed into a violet wash, stars peeking through like shy witnesses. The girl kept her gaze forward, her shawl fluttering, her posture straight despite her limp. Only once did she glance at him. Quick, almost guilty, as if sharing the burden was something forbidden. Evan didn't ask questions. He only shifted the jar to his other hand, easing the strain, and kept walking at her side as the last of the daylight faded behind them. The air cooled as night began to settle, and the last streaks of orange faded into a soft indigo glow across the ridge. Evan shifted the heavy jar against his hip, feeling the ceramic warmth bleed through his gloves. The girl walked a half step behind him, her small footprints forming a careful trail in the red dust. A faint limp marked her steps, but she never complained. She never even breathed louder than necessary. Every now and then she glanced at the jar as if worried it might slip, though Evan kept a steady pace, boots finding the smoothest path out of instinct. A low hum rolled across the valley, the sound of distant wind turbines turning toward night mode. Their blue indicator lights blinked like slow, tired fireflies. Evan looked toward the settlement far below. A few homes had their evening lanterns lit, tiny warm squares in the dimming world. "How far is your place?" he asked, keeping his voice calm and easy, the way one talks to someone who carries more than just weight. She did not answer at first. Instead, she pressed a hand to her shawl as if checking something underneath, then pointed toward a thin line of lights on the far side of the settlement. "There," she whispered, the word barely audible. Her voice had a soft, bell-like quality, fragile. Enough that Evan slowed without thinking. "You walk this whole distance every evening?" he asked. She lowered her gaze. A strand of her silver lavender hair fell forward, catching the faint glow from the turbines. "It is required," she murmured. Evan almost asked why, but something in the way she held her shoulders, straight, quiet, resigned, kept him silent. The path dipped into a shallow wash where the sand was cooler and smoother. The girl faltered slightly on the incline, so Evan angled the jar away from her and offered his free hand without forcing it. After a long moment, she lightly touched his fingers to steady herself. Her hand trembled, not from cold, but from unfamiliar contact. She pulled away once they reached level ground again, clutching her shawl close. "Thank you," she said, barely above a whisper. The settlement gate came into view, a modest structure of woven metal and sandstone. Its biometric pad flickered weakly, reacting to the cooling air. As they approached, several residents passed through the gate, their conversations falling quiet when they noticed the girl at Evan's side. Their eyes lingered on her, then on the jar in his arms, and a subtle tension tightened the air. The girl stepped closer to Evan as if shrinking from their stares. She did not hide behind him, but she angled her body to let him block part of the view. Evan pretended not to notice the watching eyes or the quiet whispers. He simply shifted the jar again and matched his steps to hers. Ahead, the lights of her section of the settlement glowed softer, dimmer than the others, like a place set aside rather than included. "Is this really all right?" Evan asked gently. Her reply came after a long pause. "You did not have to help," she said. "People here, they do not walk with me." She looked up at him then, and in her pale silver eyes he saw a mixture of fear and gratitude, a fragile hope caught between them like breath and cold air. "But you already did." She touched the rim of the jar he carried, a small gesture, careful and deliberate. "So yes, it is all right." The words were soft, but they carried a quiet weight as they stepped through the gate together. The gate's soft glow washed over the narrow path ahead, casting long shadows that stretched across the sand, like quiet reminders of everyone who had walked here alone. Evan adjusted the jar again, feeling the handle press a faint groove into his glove, and followed the girl deeper into her section of the settlement. Homes here were smaller, the lights dimmer as if they were trying not to disturb the rest of the world. The air smelled faintly of mineral dust and warm clay, a scent that settled low and familiar. The girl kept close but not quite beside him, her steps careful, her shawl fluttering in a breeze that had cooled down since sunset. "I am sorry they stared," she said suddenly. Her voice, soft and steady, surprised him. She had spoken more in these few minutes than she had in the entire walk before. Evan shook his head lightly. "People stare at anything they do not understand. It is nothing I cannot handle." She looked down, her fingers brushing the edge of the jar he carried. "It is not you they watch. It is me." He wanted to ask why, but she moved a little faster, as if guiding him to avoid that question. They passed a cluster of houses shaped from compressed sandstone, their windows glowing with warm amber light. Children's voices drifted from one doorway, curious but quickly hushed. The girl's posture tightened at the sound. "Do you have a name?" Evan asked gently. She slowed, considering him with a cautious tilt of her head. "Sayuri," she said. "My name is Sayuri." The moment she said it, something softened in the air, as if offering her name had been a fragile step across a boundary she rarely crossed. "Evan," he replied. "Evan Miller." She repeated it softly, almost testing the weight of it. "Evan." The path widened near a long trough carved from metal and stone, filled with filtered water shimmering under a single lamp. Several residents stood nearby, filling smaller containers from the trough. The moment Sayuri approached, their posture shifted, quiet but unmistakable. A subtle tightening around shoulders. A small shuffle backward. Eyes that lingered too long. Sayuri paused, her fingers curling into her shawl. Evan felt her breath hitch, barely perceptible. She angled herself, so he stood between her and the group, though she did not touch him. He pretended not to notice the tension or the way the conversations lowered in volume. Instead, he gestured toward the nearest empty space. "Where should I set this?" She pointed toward a narrow dwelling at the far end of the row, its door framed by pale strands of woven reed. A faint blue symbol glowed above the entrance. The moment Evan stepped closer, he felt an unexpected stillness there, as if sound itself respected the quiet that belonged to this place. "Here," Sayuri whispered. "This is my home." Evan lowered the jar carefully onto the flat stone beside her door. The ceramic thudded gently against the surface, the sound deep and resonant, almost like a breath finally released. Sayuri stood beside him, her hands clasped in front of her, as if unsure what to do with them. For a long moment, she simply watched the jar, as though its safe arrival meant more than she could express. When she finally looked up at him, the silver in her eyes reflected the soft doorway light, delicate and steady. "Nobody has ever carried it for me," she said. "Not once." Evan offered a small, easy smile. "Nothing grand, nothing heroic. There is always a first time." Sayuri held his gaze a second longer than before, her breath slow, her expression unreadable, as if she were memorizing the moment before it slipped away into the night. The quiet around Sayuri's home felt different from the rest of the settlement, as if the air itself softened to let her exist without disturbance. Evan stood beside the jar he had set down, the warmth of its ceramic faint against the cooling night. Sayuri lingered near her doorway, one hand resting on the woven reed frame, her posture hesitant, as if she were caught between wanting to retreat inside and wanting to remain in the small circle of calm they had created together. A pale blue lantern glowed above them, its light steady and gentle, casting soft reflections across her silver lavender skin. "You should rest," Sayuri murmured, her eyes dropping to the dust at her feet. "Your workday was long." Evan shrugged lightly. "Nothing I am not used to. Machines complain more than people do." Her lips curved in a small, fleeting smile, the kind that appeared and disappeared before becoming real. She shifted her weight, her limp noticeable again now that she had stopped walking. Evan frowned slightly. "Your leg," he said. "Does it hurt?" She folded her hands together, the shawl slipping enough to reveal a thin band of pale markings trailing down her calf, almost like shimmering ink beneath the skin. "It has always hurt," she answered softly. "It is just quieter sometimes." The words hung in the air, gentle but heavy. Before he could ask anything more, a soft metallic chime sounded from within her home. Sayuri straightened, her expression tightening with instinctive caution. "It is only my purifier," she said quickly, sensing his concern. "It signals a new cycle." Evan nodded, though he noticed the faint tremor in her voice. "Does it need repair?" She shook her head. "No. It works as it should. I maintain it myself." The pride in her tone was subtle but clear. Evan respected that. He had seen how difficult it could be to keep older systems running this far from the central districts. The settlement wind picked up again, carrying the dry scent of mineral dust. Sayuri's shawl fluttered around her, brushing her cheek before she tucked it back into place. She hesitated, then quietly asked, "Why did you help me?" Evan looked at her for a long moment, the lantern's glow catching the faint shimmer in her eyes. He answered simply, "Because you looked like you needed someone to walk beside you." She blinked, the reaction small but unmistakably startled. "Most do not see that," she said. "Most see." She stopped herself, the unspoken words folding into the shadows behind her. Evan did not push. Silence settled between them again, not uncomfortable, but warm in a way that surprised them both. A sound drifted from deeper in the settlement. Soft laughter, footsteps, ordinary evening life. It felt distant from this quiet corner, almost like another world. Sayuri drew a slow breath. "I should take the water inside," she said. "It will cool too quickly if it stays out here." Evan stepped toward the jar without thinking. "Let me carry it in for you." Her breath caught, and she shook her head quickly. "No, you have already carried too much. I can take it from here." She placed both hands on the jar's handles, her fingers brushing the spot where his gloves had held it. For a moment, she seemed to draw strength from its warmth. Then she looked up at him, her expression calm but fragile at the edges. "Thank you, Evan." Her voice was barely more than a whisper. "For walking with me." She lifted the jar slowly, carefully, and stepped inside her home, the pale blue lantern dimming slightly as the door eased closed behind her. Morning came quietly to the outpost, warming the horizon with a pale gold that pushed away the last traces of night. Evan stepped out of his small unit, rubbing sleep from his eyes as the desert air carried the scent of heated earth and distant turbines. He had planned to check the filters on the northern pump before the midday heat set in, but his mind kept drifting back to the soft blue lantern above Sayuri's door and the way she had held the jar with such deliberate care. He found himself glancing toward her side of the settlement without meaning to. The memory of her whispered thank you stayed with him longer than it should have. As he walked across the courtyard, several workers nodded to him. but their conversations carried the same uneasy hush he had sensed the night before. When he reached the pump station, he noticed a small figure sitting on the low wall near the water barrels. Sayuri. She sat with her shawl wrapped around her shoulders, her silver lavender skin catching the early sunlight in soft reflections. Her injured leg was stretched out carefully, angled just enough to ease the strain. She looked like she had been waiting for someone, though she kept her hands folded neatly in her lap as if trying not to appear out of place. Evan slowed his steps. Sayuri. She looked up quickly, surprise flickering across her expression. I did not mean to interrupt your work, she said. The purifier malfunctioned this morning. It is nothing dangerous, only a minor issue, but I do not have the right tools. Evan set his toolkit beside the wall. Let me take a look. Her eyes widened slightly, as if she had not expected him to offer so quickly. I did not want to ask you, she said softly. You already helped me once. He gave her a gentle smile. Helping once does not mean I am done. She hesitated, then nodded toward her home. It is inside. I did not want to leave it unattended. Sayuri moved slowly as she led him, her limp more pronounced in the morning light. Evan kept a respectful distance, matching his pace to hers. Inside her home, the air was cooler, scented with clean mineral water and faint traces of dried herbs. A small purifier unit sat near the back wall, its indicator light flickering unevenly. Evan crouched beside it, listening to the soft stutter of its internal fan. It is not serious, he said. Just a clogged intake valve. Dust gets everywhere out here. Sayuri knelt a short distance away, her hands clasped together. I clean it every day, she whispered. Sometimes twice. You are doing a good job, he said, glancing at her with reassurance. Machines wear down. It is not your fault. Her shoulders eased slightly, the tension dissolving like sand shifting under wind. As Evan worked, the soft rhythm of tools clicking against metal filled the room. Sayuri watched quietly, her expression a mix of curiosity and worry, as if she feared the purifier might fail despite his confidence. When the final connection clicked into place and the machine hummed steadily, a subtle breath escaped her. It sounds right again, she said. Thank you. Evan sat back on his heels, wiping dust from his gloves. You can call me when it acts up. I am just across the courtyard. She looked at him for a long moment, her silver eyes reflecting the soft blue glow of the machine. I did not think anyone would say that to me. Her voice trembled, not with fear, but with something gentler. Trust, maybe, or the beginning of it. Evan smiled with quiet warmth. Well, I just did. The purifier hummed steadily, filling the small home with a calm that felt deeper than the sound itself. The purifier's steady hum softened the room, a low calming rhythm that seemed to smooth out the air between them. Sayuri sat near the wall, her hands resting carefully on her lap, watching Evan with the kind of attention that came from someone unused to being helped and unsure how to hold the moment without breaking it. Morning light filtered through the small window, casting pale beams across the floor and catching the faint shimmer beneath her lavender silver skin. Evan wiped a trace of dust from his fingers and stood, giving the purifier one more check. It is running perfectly now, he said. You should not have trouble for a while. Sayuri nodded, but her eyes lingered on him rather than the machine. There was something searching in her gaze, as if she were trying to understand something bigger than the purifier or the jar or the walk across the ridge. Evan, she said softly, do people on your world help strangers often? He brushed his hand along the tool bag at his side, unsure how to answer that in a simple way. Some do, he said. Some do not. I guess it depends on whether they see someone who needs help. Sayuri lowered her eyes, her thin shawl slipping slightly before she caught it. On my world, she said, help is offered only when instructed. Not freely, not without purpose. Her voice flattened gently, not bitter, just factual. Here, those around me think purpose matters more than kindness. Evan leaned against the wall, giving her space but staying near enough for her to feel he was not pulling away. Maybe kindness is a purpose, he said. She seemed to stop breathing for a second, as if the idea was something she had never heard spoken aloud. A quiet fell again, but this silence felt warmer, softened by the morning light and the calm hum of the purifier. Sayuri's eyes traced the floor before she asked, when you saw me yesterday, carrying the jar, what did you think? Evan considered the memory, the dusty ridge, the heavy jar, her small figure bracing against the wind. "I thought you were tired," he said truthfully. "And I thought you should not have to walk alone with that kind of weight." She looked up then, slowly, her pale eyes reflecting the faint blue from the machine. "But you did not know who I was," she whispered. "Or what I have." Evan met her gaze without flinching. "I did not need to know." Her breath caught again, fragile but steadying. The words seemed to dissolve a barrier she had been carrying for longer than she cared to remember. She curled her fingers into her shawl, holding it close to her chest. "People avoid me," she said. "They say being near me causes misfortune. Some say it weakens their spirit. Others say the air changes when I pass." Evan tried to read her expression, but it sat somewhere between hurt and something she had taught herself to accept. "Do you believe them?" he asked gently. She shook her head once. "No," she said. "But when many people believe something, it becomes true in a different way." Evan let the thought settle. He understood the kind of truth she meant. Not factual, social. The kind that isolates someone because everyone expects them to stay on the edges. The purifier hummed softly, a quiet reassurance in the small room. Sayuri lifted her gaze again. "When you walked with me," she said, "it was the first time in many seasons that anyone stayed beside me without fear." Evan gave a small, quiet smile. "Fear is loud," he said, "but kindness is louder if you let it be." Sayuri did not smile, but her eyes softened in a way that felt like the beginning of something long denied. "I did not know that," she whispered. Evan picked up his toolkit, tightening its strap. "You will," he said. "You just needed someone to start the noise for you." The faintest hint of warmth touched her expression, like dawn breaking gently across a shaded ridge. The afternoon settled into a muted stillness as Evan stepped out of Sayuri's home, the soft hum of the purifier continuing behind the closed door. The courtyard outside shimmered with heat, though the sun had already begun its slow descent toward the ridge. He walked a few paces before noticing the faint sound of footsteps behind him, light and uneven. When he glanced back, Sayuri stood in her doorway, one hand braced gently against the frame. "Evan," she called, her voice carrying just enough strength to reach him. He turned fully toward her. "Do you need something?" She hesitated, as if weighing the risk of asking. "Will you walk with me this evening?" The question surprised him, though he kept it from showing. Yesterday, she could barely look at him without uncertainty. Now she was asking for his company. "Of course," he said, "if you want that." A soft relief flickered across her face before she nodded and retreated inside to prepare for her daily walk to the communal well. Evan spent the rest of the afternoon repairing the western pump, but his mind kept drifting toward the quiet invitation she had offered. By dusk, he found himself waiting near the main path, the same one she had traveled alone so many evenings before. The sky had turned a washed lavender, matching the faint hue of her skin, and the wind carried the cool scent of settling sand. Sayuri approached with her shawl wrapped carefully around her shoulders, the empty water jar held close to her body. Her steps were slow but determined, and when she reached him, she paused just long enough to meet his eyes. "Thank you for waiting," she said. They began walking side by side, the jar tapping softly against her knee. For a moment, neither spoke. The desert around them glowed with the last traces of sunlight, casting long shadows over the ground. "I used to walk this path at night," Sayuri said quietly, "before others were awake, before anyone could see me." Evan looked at her gently. "Why stop?" She brushed a hand along the jar's rim, her fingers tracing the smooth indentation worn by years of use. It felt like hiding, and hiding makes the weight feel heavier. Evan nodded, understanding more than she knew. After a few steps she added, "People say the water grows cold if I carry it with another nearby." Evan raised an eyebrow. "Does it?" She shook her head. "No, it is only water. It does what water does." He smiled. "Exactly." The wind picked up, carrying a swirl of dust across the path. Sayuri's shawl whipped lightly against her arm, and Evan instinctively stepped to block the strongest gust, shielding her without making a show of it. She noticed. Her steps slowed, her expression turning thoughtful. "You do things without being asked," she said. "It is unusual." "Maybe," Evan replied, "but it is not difficult." She studied him as if trying to understand something deeper. "Where I am from," she said slowly, "people measure every action. Every gesture has a purpose." "And here?" he asked. She shrugged lightly. "Here, people pretend not to see me. That is their purpose. Evan felt a quiet tightening in his chest, not anger, just a recognition of how heavy that kind of isolation could be. Well, he said, my purpose right now is simple. I am here because you asked me to walk with you. Sayri stopped, surprised. Her silver eyes brightened faintly in the fading light. I did ask, she whispered, as if the truth of that held more weight than she expected. They continued walking, matching each other's pace, and for the first time since Evan had met her, Sayri did not angle her body away from the passing settlement lights. She walked openly beside him, shawl brushing his arm with each careful step. As the first stars appeared overhead, she spoke again, almost too softly to hear. It feels different, she said. Not walking alone. Evan glanced at her, letting the quiet answer for him. Sometimes silence carried more comfort than anything words could hold. The path toward the well narrowed as they walked, the ground smoothing into a familiar stretch of pale stone worn down by countless footsteps. The evening light had faded into a deep violet, leaving the sky wide and open above them, dotted with early stars that shimmered like distant lanterns. Sayri held the jar steady at her side, its surface catching the faint glow from the overhead lamps that lined the walkway. Evan noticed the calm in her movements, a quiet steadiness that had not been there the first time he saw her on the ridge. She walked as if the weight in her hands was less now, even though the jar was just as heavy as before. There is something I should tell you, Sayri said, her voice soft but certain. Evan slowed, giving her room to speak without interruption. She looked ahead for a long moment before her eyes drifted toward him. You know people avoid me, she continued. You know they call me marked. But you do not know why. Her fingers tightened around the handle of the jar, and her shoulders lifted slightly, as if bracing against a cold wind. Evan waited, not pushing, letting the quiet around them hold the space for her words. I carry something, she said. Not a sickness, not a danger, but a condition from birth. My people call it the veil sign. It is a rare pattern in our energy flow, a kind of imbalance. It does not harm me. It does not harm anyone. But long ago, the elders decided it meant the person who carried it should walk alone, so others would not become dependent on them. She laughed softly, but it was not amusement. It was the tired sound of someone who had lived too long under a rule that made no sense. They believed people like me would change the balance of those around us. They believed we would draw too much emotion from others, or give too much in return. Evan frowned slightly. But that is just superstition. Yes, she whispered. But even superstition can shape a person's entire life. A light breeze lifted her shawl, revealing the faint shimmering marks along her arm, the same ones Evan had seen near her calf. They were delicate, almost beautiful, patterns flowing like liquid silver beneath her skin. These markings, she said, noticing his gaze, they are the reason. People see them and remember the old stories. They think I should stay apart. Evan's voice was gentle. Do you believe any of that? Sayri shook her head. No. But when everyone else believes something, you begin to wonder if they are right. She looked toward the settlement lights, her eyes distant. For many years, I have walked this path with no one beside me. I told myself it was easier, simpler. But when you carried the jar, when you fixed the purifier, when you waited for me tonight, she paused, her breath catching in a fragile way that made the moment feel tender and honest. I remembered what it feels like to be seen. They reached the well, the water inside reflecting the soft glow of the surrounding lamps. The quiet splash of droplets echoed faintly, a gentle background rhythm. Sayri set the jar down and rested her hands on its rim. For the first time, she did not stand apart from him. She moved a little closer, her shoulder almost brushing his. I did not think anyone would choose to walk with me, she said. I did not think that could happen. Evan looked at her, the calm in her silver eyes, and replied with a quiet certainty. You do not have to walk alone anymore. Sayri exhaled softly, the sound small but full of meaning, as if a weight she had carried for years had shifted just enough for her to feel it. She stood beside him in the lamplight, no longer a shadow on the edge of the settlement, but someone seen, someone heard, someone no longer entirely alone. The well's quiet glow wrapped the two of them in a soft circle of light as the night deepened around the settlement. The water inside the basin reflected the sky in gentle ripples, turning the stars above into trembling specks of silver. Sayri dipped the jar into the cool water, her movements slow and deliberate. She held the rim with both hands, letting the weight settle against her palms. Evan watched her without rushing, sensing something in the air that felt fragile, like a breath held too long. When the jar filled, she lifted it with a steady effort, her arms tightening slightly. Evan stepped forward, offering his hand without insisting. She hesitated for only a moment before letting him take one of the handles, sharing the weight the way they had shared the walk. They began the journey back toward her home, the jar swinging gently between them. The path was quieter than before, wrapped in a peaceful hush that felt intentional, almost protective. The lamps along the walkway dimmed as they passed, shifting into their nighttime mode, leaving only a faint halo of blue around each one. "Evan," Sayuri said softly, her voice blending with the sound of distant wind. "When you found me yesterday on the ridge, I thought you would walk past." Evan glanced at her, the jar's handle firm in his hand. "Why would I do that?" She looked ahead, her gaze thoughtful. "Because that is what everyone does. They see the markings and choose distance." She brushed her sleeve back just enough to reveal the faint silver patterns along her skin, glowing softly under the minimal light. "You did not step back. You stepped closer." Evan smiled quietly. Sometimes people just need someone to walk toward them. Her breath caught in her throat, small but audible. "I did not know how much I wanted that," she whispered. The path sloped gently upward, and the jar's weight shifted between them. Sayuri adjusted her grip, the movement careful but confident. She no longer walked a half step behind him. She walked beside him, matching his stride. When they reached her home, the blue lantern above the door flickered gently, casting a soft glow across the woven reeds of the doorway. Sayuri set the jar down near the entrance, her hands lingering on its rim before she slowly straightened. Evan stood a short distance away, giving her space yet remaining present, grounded. Sayuri turned to him, her expression illuminated by the lantern's cool light. "There is something I realized tonight," she said. Her voice was steady, almost calm, but carried a tremor beneath it that felt like truth rising to the surface. "The elders said people like me should walk alone because we change the lives of those near us. They said we alter the balance around us. I believed it for a long time." Evan met her eyes. "And do you still believe it?" Sayuri looked at him with a clarity he had not seen before. "Yes," she said softly, "but not the way they meant. I walked alone because no one stayed near long enough to feel what I brought with me." She took a small step closer, her silver eyes reflecting the lantern's soft glow. "You walked beside me. You saw me. You chose to stay." The night settled into a profound stillness, wrapping her words in something gentle and unmistakably real. Sayuri let out a quiet breath, her voice faint but steady. "You changed the balance, Evan. Not because of my markings, but because of your kindness." Evan felt the weight of her words in his chest, not heavy, but meaningful. He answered with the same quiet honesty she had offered him. "You changed mine too." Sayuri looked at him for a long moment, her expression softening into something warm, almost luminous. She did not step closer. She did not speak again. She simply stood there in the glow of the lantern, her silver lavender skin reflecting the soft blue light, her eyes holding a calm he had never seen in them before. The silence between them was not empty. It was full, delicate, and sincere, as if the desert night itself understood what had shifted. In that quiet, under the fading pulse of the lantern, Sayuri's eyes lifted to meet his once more. And for the first time, the reflection he saw in them did not belong to someone walking alone.